she hung up. But we brought Investigator Myers in, played the call for the court, and what we find out is that 13 seconds passed after the call is connected, after voicemail comes on. The person who is on the other phone is holding the phone, listening to Michele's greeting, waiting for the beep to go off, and deciding whether or not to leave a message. That is not what Barbara Thayer testified she did. She testified that as soon as the voicemail came on, she hung up. The characteristics of the call are consistent with an estranged husband who's thinking, where is she? Maybe a little aggravated, knows that the divorce is about to be settled, picks up the phone, calls his wife, and sits there and says, should I leave a message or shouldn't I? Listens to the voicemail and then says, nah, forget it, and hangs up the phone. Perfectly consistent with Cal having made the call, completely inconsistent with what Barbara Thayer said she did. Thayer was terribly confused about the phone call she made that morning. She made a call at 7:08 to routine. She then made two other phone calls to routine, one from Cal's house and one from her house. 3 different phone calls within a few hours to a person who she says she only had to say, look, I'm not going to be able to go riding today. She told Investigator Myers, according to Investigator Myers, that she was confused, that she thought she was calling Pam Brock and ended up calling routine by mistake. She told the court, based upon her phone records, that the number that she called 6 times that day this 761-2620, that number was Pam, and she even wrote it down in the corner of her own phone bill, and we can see those phone calls made on the 12th. They start down here, 761-2620. But what we learned from Investigator Myers is that wasn't Pam at all. That was Nikki Burdick, Michele's friend, who knew Stacy, or Stacy knew her. This is the individual she called 6 times that morning, not Pam. It's understandable that she's confused about what took place. It was an unusual morning, and it ended up being very unusual as time went along. We also know that she didn't make the call because, frankly, it was impossible for her to make the call. Even if you accept her at her word, that the first thing she did, she woke up in the morning and she said she got woken up by Cal's call and he asked her to come over. She said she got dressed, put her contacts in because she claimed she didn't have glasses, but remember what Pam Brock told us. She did in fact have glasses at that point. So this is a woman who's waking up. If you're taking time to put your contacts in, you're not in any particular hurry, and there's no reason why she would be. All she had to do is get over to the Harris residence in time to help the kids get ready to go off to school and then babysit Tanner. She says then she calls, the last thing she does is call routine. Wouldn't that be the first thing she would have done? You get a phone call and the individual says, look, can you come over? Thayer says, well, I have plans, but yeah, I'll cancel those and come back. You hang up the phone with Cal, and then you call routine and say, look, I can't make it. And that's at 7:08. And then you go about your morning routine, whatever that is, use the bathroom, get dressed, put your contacts in, whatever, and go over there. But if she did it that way, which is reasonable, there's no way in the world she could have made that phone call at 7:13 or 7:15. So her testimony is that she did all these other things ahead of time, and the last thing she did before she walked out of the house was call routine. But even if she did that, it still does not leave her enough time to get to the Harris residence to make this phone call. And in fact, she denied making the phone call. She denied it twice. Once under oath, in the testimony at the first trial, specifically said, I did not make the call between 7:13 and 7:15. Now, Mr. Martin, on redirect, said, well, you only said that because you were denying that that was the time you made the call. You remember making a call, but not that time. That's the time of the call. If you didn't make the call at 7:13 or 7:14 or 7:15, You didn't make it, because there was not another call from the Harris residence or from Barbara Thayer's residence to Michele Harris's cell phone at all. She denied it under oath at the first trial, and she did not mention it or say anything about making the phone call when the police interviewed her on her September 12th, September 14th, September 16th. There was a 6-page written statement, and we went through it on cross, contradicts her interaction with Cal at the from what she described in her testimony, does not mention the call. September 19th, she doesn't mention it. September 25th, she doesn't mention it. On October 2nd, she's asked by investigator Hochdaner specifically, and Hochdaner had it in her notes. Did you call Michele Harris's cell phone at 7:13, because that was the time it was on Michelle's cell phone? And the answer that Hochdaner wrote down specifically was no. No. Maybe I called her later on in the morning, or I think I called her later on in the morning. It's the exact same thing she said under oath, which she didn't make that call between 7:13 and 7:15. Now, we know how long it took her to do some of these things because we know when stuff happened. The call from her house to routine ended somewhere around 7:09. Maybe a little bit later than 7:09, maybe right at 7:09, depending on when it was that she made the call. And she didn't just jump in her car. She had to walk across her yard, leave the house, walk across the yard to her parked car there, and you can see it's a bit of a distance from her house to where she parks her car. That's a picture from the air. This is a picture on the ground from the same area. You can't even see where the car's parked. There's her house over there. There's the same tree. See, the car's parked over there somewhere. Has to walk across the yard to her house and get in the car, start it up, and go. So she hangs up the phone call with Mr. Routine at around somewhere after 7:09. She doesn't start down the driveway until 7:10 or 7:11, and then has the 4+ minute drive to the Harris driveway, which brings us to 7:14 or 7:15. She's at the driveway at the time the call's made, not in the house, under the best circumstance for her. And she then gets out, spends at least a minute looking around the car. We're now to 7:15, 7:16, has to drive down a quarter mile down the street, gets to the house, walks in the house, 7:17, 7:18, long after the call was made, under the best scenario for her. Now, the police did 2 test drives from driveway to driveway. Ask yourself, why didn't they time? Thayer's obviously cooperative with them. Why didn't they time the whole sequence? If they say she could have made it between 7:09 and 7:15, from her house hanging up with a routine to calling Michelle's cell phone at 7:15, do it. Start at her house, hit a stopwatch, walk across her yard, get in the car, and drive down. They never did that, I suggest, because they knew the timing would not work out. They simply did the drive from driveway to driveway. Now, Investigator Meyer said that the phones were sometimes off. But for the phones to be off on the timing, they'd have to be off by 3 or more minutes in the direction that favors the prosecution. And we know that the difference in the phone call between Michelle's cell phone records, which indicated 7:14 and 33 seconds, and Cal's house phone, which indicated 7:15, was less than a minute. The difference between those two were less than a minute. They could have done testing to determine how long it would have taken, testing on how different the phones were, but they never did. It's also worth noting that Cal, when asked by Myers and Young later on that morning what time Thayer arrived, said 7:45. Why would he lie about that at that time? He has no reason to misrepresent that. According to Thayer, he doesn't even know that she made the phone call. He has no clue that a phone call was made, that it'll ever become an issue in the case, that there'll ever be testimony about it, and they simply ask him, what time did she arrive? And he says about 7:45. That's much more consistent with him calling her around 7 or shortly after, her hanging up the phone with him, calling routine, getting dressed, and then driving over to the house, taking about a few minutes to do that. Why is the phone call so important? The phone call is critical to the prosecutor. To the defense, it doesn't matter one bit. The fact that Cal didn't make a phone call that day to Michele simply puts him in the same category as Greg Taylor, Brian Early, Gary Taylor, and a number of other individuals who heard that she was missing and didn't make a phone call to her. She just didn't come home. They're going through a divorce. She's with her boyfriend. Something happened. I'm done. I'm getting through my day and going to do what I have to do. Cal can easily explain not making a call. But if he made the phone call, Judge, if he made the phone call, and all the evidence points to him making that call, then we know he's innocent. We know for sure he's innocent. Because Cal, when he picks up that phone to call Michele, is doing one of two things. Either calling to find out where his wife is that morning, or he's calling, if he's innocent, or he's calling a phone that he knows has a dead person at the other end. And he's not doing that unless he's leaving one of those Scott Peterson messages. Michele, I'm really worried. Why aren't you home with the kids? You're always home. What are you doing? Making some kind of false alibi for himself. That's why the phone call is so critical to the prosecution. They realized in 2004 that if Cal Harris made the call and didn't leave a message, he didn't kill Michele. So they had to have somebody else make the call. They went back to Thayer and said, did you make the call? Despite her denials of doing it, despite the fact that she never told them to do it, she says, oh yes, absolutely, positive, I made the call. Not credible at all. Now, Cal makes a number of other calls through the course of the day. He calls Barbara Thayer at the house at 8:44. Barbara Thayer doesn't remember that call. He makes calls to Brock. He talks to his brother Stephen. And what's he doing at that point in time? He's trying to arrange the day, not knowing when Michelle's going to come home. He doesn't know what's going to happen. Thayer came over and said to him, look, I had plans for today. I wasn't going to babysit today. I'm here now, but I'm going to have to take Tanner back to my house in order to do my chores. Tanner was 2 at that time. You can't have somebody watching a 2-year-old, leaving him in the house while you're out feeding horses. Cal understood that. Thayer understood that. So Cal calls Brock and says, can you do something for me and cover for me or help with Michele? Michele hasn't come home. And at no point does Barbara Thayer make a phone call to Michele Harris because she just didn't. If she was so eager to talk to her, so important that she called her, as soon as Cal left, she could have called her again. She could have called her from her house. And why wouldn't she have left a message that morning? She didn't have to say anything about the boyfriend. She just could have said, Michele, it's Barb, I'm over at your house, where are you? Cal wouldn't have thought anything about that at all, even if he'd overheard the call. Cal gets a phone call from Shannon Taylor, an accusatory, angry call, where he says to her, look, all I know is that, she didn't come home, she's been out drinking, and I don't know where she is. Initially, Cal was not worried about Michele, and neither was Thayer. Initially, they just thought that she was with a boyfriend or out drinking. But as the day wore on, Cal became increasingly worried. And we know what happened, because we know that Linda Angeles sees him at 2 o'clock picking up the children. And she says she looked at him, and he looked worried and upset. And it was unusual for him there to be picking up the children. And then we know from Todd Mansfield later in the night, and by the way, this thing with the Turners, he didn't stop and tell them about what happened with Michele. As he was driving by them on the 12th, they both made a big point about that. We didn't see the children. Cal just waved. How could he have done that? We know the children are in the car because he's heading home, and he gets there, and Mansfield tells us he's there with his kids. And when he gets there, and he talks to them, that's when he breaks down. When he sees Todd, he breaks down because he realizes now it's night. She didn't oversleep at her boyfriend's house. She didn't just go out drinking. Something horrible has happened. And what's his concern? His concern's, what am I going to tell the children if she doesn't come home? What am I going to tell the children if she doesn't come home? Crying, upset with his brother and one of his lifelong friends. It's not good. What am I going to tell my kids? That's the classic excited utterance. That's the classic emotional response. That's not him calculating, trying to do or say something. That's a man who's come home after a day where it started off a little unusual and got worse and worse as the day went on, to the point where he's home with his 4 kids, his wife isn't there, his brother and his best friend are there, and he begins to understand the gravity of the situation and makes those statements. Do not allow the prosecutor to twist those words. He didn't say, how am I going to tell the children? He didn't say, something happened to Michele. He said, what am I going to tell them if she doesn't come home? The next day, oh, and by the way, during the course of the day, he talks to the police. And what does he tell the police? He tells the police that she was hanging out with bad people in Waverly, true. That he was concerned she was using drugs, true. He's concerned. That he theorized that she could have just dropped off the car and went out with somebody. Cal didn't know that for sure, but suggested that to them. And said to them, you can search my house, you can search my cards, you can search the property, and you can interview my kids. You can have my computer, you can have whatever you want, you have a run of the place. Completely cooperative with the police, took no steps at all to stop them from doing anything. And as far as the van goes, when Barbara Thayer walked out with him looking for, I think, a backpack for one of the kids, remember what she said with Cal's reaction when he opened up the van. She was shocked, he was stunned, oh my God, this thing is a mess. I want you to get it down to the dealership. You got to clean up. I want to sell it. Why? Not because Michele is gone. Remember what Thayer said. They change cars like most people change towels, I think is what her quote was. And if you look at the photographs of the van, you'll see that the sticker is still in the window. That van did not belong to Michele Harris or to Cal Harris. It belonged to the dealership. It was one of the benefits of Cal having a dealership, which is he got to swap out demos. So once he saw, you see the picture of the sticker in it. It's just looking at 205. One of the things that happens is they get to swap out cars. So he looks at this thing and said, this is running off. I want to change the oil, get it cleaned up, and sell it, because they had to take care of these vehicles. They lose money. It wasn't I'm selling Michele's car because she's dead. It's I want to swap out this car for another one, which is exactly what he did. He took that, he ended up giving that van to the police and got another van for Brock to drive. The call that Cindy Turner reports about 8 in the morning, which is Cal saying to her, what she first says is, you don't understand, she was no good. And then I asked her about previous testimony where she said she is no good, indicating that the use of the past tense was really Turner's, not Cal's. But regardless, what Cal was talking about, and it's clear from the rest of the testimony, wasn't that Michele was no good. It's that she was hanging out with people in Waverly that were no good, which is the same thing he told the police, which is the same thing he told Turner. And the idea that 8 o'clock in the morning, he's talking to Turner, running down his wife, is absurd. Because we know that 8 o'clock in the morning, he's driving his kids to school. How do we know that? Because at 8:30 in the morning, he's in school, which is about a 20 or 25-minute ride away, in the principal's office, crying, not knowing what to do with the children. And he's comforted by Lynn Angeles. And she testifies to that. And we know from the conversation that's reported from Turner that he got advice as to what should happen. That he should get the kids some counseling if they have to go, and that the number of times and the type of the counseling was something that was recommended by the school, not by Cal. And as far as the interview with the police, they said that they claim that he said he never called Michele, but that's not what they asked him. And again, being specific to what they said we asked him, did you contact anyone to find out where she was? And he said no. Anyone, obviously understood by him to be anyone else. Not, did you call Michele? They never asked him that question at all. The police, on the 13th, Cal, later in the day, goes to work. He's seen by his friends who went up to look for Michele or offer to help Michele. Cal didn't go looking for Michele for the reasons that Greg Taylor, Shannon Taylor, Gary Taylor, Brian Early didn't go, because they're family. And we heard that from the individuals who conducted the search. They do not want relatives searching for these missing people. Now, on the 14th is when he drops the children off to the Turners in the late afternoon, then goes up to his house, and then comes back. The reason why that's important is a couple of things. One is, by that point, the police believed they had found blood in the house. Ironically, that the blood they found was on the wall was the area where it was non-human dog blood, but that's the area that they first saw. And Anderson described on his testimony that that area, the spots in that area was about 6 inches by 9.5 inches, roughly, about the size of a loaf of bread. And what happens is Cal drops the kids off with his truck. He brings the truck up to the house, meets Anderson. Anderson says he walks Cal into the house to get clothing and whatnot for the kids for the weekend, because he's turning the house and the property over to the police. Walks him in. At that point in time, it is inconceivable that Cal, who had previously been told by Myers and Young, there's blood in your house. Cal asked him a number of questions. Where is it? In the garage, on the wall near the garage. We're not sure how much. We don't know how long it's been there. And Cal asked a number of questions. Innocent or guilty? When Cal walks into the house at about 4:45 with Anderson on the 14th, he says to them, he would say, where's the blood? What blood? What are you talking about? Innocent, because he would want to know what they're talking about. There was blood in the house. If he was guilty, in his head, he cleaned it all up, would want to know what they found. Either way, he's asking them, what happened? What's the blood? And the only blood they know of at that point are a few stains in the alcove and that spots of blood that form a pattern of about 6 to 9.5 inches. He walks into the house. He leaves his truck there because the police, Anderson asked him to. Said, leave the truck, take the other van. That was the replacement van that he had given to Brock. Drives back down to the Thayers. He's now going to pick up his kids and go to his brothers in Cooperstown, where we have these conversations. I don't know what they're talking about with this obsession with, their obsession with describing how Cal was cleaning his glasses. The man is driving at night with his kids to Cooperstown, which is a couple hours away. He had just left the police, so he wants to clean his glasses. So what? It's ridiculous, but it's some attempt, I don't know, maybe some nod to Shakespeare and Macbeth, to make the innocuous sinister. And they have a conversation at that point in time. And it's interesting what they report that Cal said. Cal said, the conversation, they found some blood, and they asked him what blood, where, and according to them, it was a spot of blood the size of a loaf of bread. Not spots, but spot is what they report. It is, and they ask a few other questions, or very few other questions that they report. How could that have come from? Cal, according to them, offers an explanation. Well, I cut myself shaving. If Cal had killed Michele, the explanation he would have offered would not have been, I cut myself shaving, because he would have known that it was Michele's blood they found. And he would have said, Michele cut herself shaving. Michele cut herself. Michele did something. But it is not that. He says something about himself. They don't ask any follow-up questions to it. They don't ask anything else. This conversation is taken out of context. And what we have here as plausible explanation for what took place, it can't have been that he's describing to the Turners a spot of blood the size of a loaf of bread that he knows he cleaned up. The police may or may not have found blood in the house at that point. He did it or didn't do it. Assume he did it for the time being. He knows he cleaned up that spot of blood. He knows there's nothing left of it. And there actually is nothing left of it. There's not a trace of it left. The floor scene couldn't find any of it. Why in the world would he ever describe that pool as opposed to the few sub-millimeter stains that they actually found at that point in time? Even if he had done this, he's not going to describe that. And ultimately, we know he didn't say that because there was no pool-sized loaf of bread, spot of blood, ever. There's no proof of it anywhere. They've taken this statement that reported by the Turners, and they've created this myth that somehow there's this invisible spot of blood in the middle of the floor for which they can find no proof, and which is completely inconsistent with what the forensic evidence shows us. Whole blood in the middle of a cleaned up area. It is ludicrous. And of course what the Turners actually told the police was that Cal didn't say that on September 14th, but he said it in October or November when Turner was there putting up a trampoline or something. That was the testimony about when they said that the statement was made. It was clearly, if it was made at all, referring to the bread loaf-sized spots of blood, of the dog's blood that Anderson had first found when he walked into the house. You next have this absurd claim by Thayer that she says that Cal asked her to bleach the countertops and scrub his eyeglasses and wash with a toothbrush. Never tells that to the police through multiple interviews up through September 25th. You have the flack about the school folders, which really is, in many ways, ridiculous, given the investigation the police did and what they knew about it. Thayer has reported a couple of different things. She's reported that the countertops were cleaned off and that they never looked like that, and that they were always cluttered, and that they had all this material on them, and that that's the way they looked on September 11th. And of course, Mr. Ford, who was at the house that morning, who was called 3 previous times by the prosecutor, says, well, no, the countertop looked exactly like what's depicted here. I remember the pig, I remember everything. This is the way it looked. It was, I put the groceries down there. It wasn't cluttered. It didn't have a bunch of mess on it. And the school folders, they interview the children on the 14th, and the children tell Mulvey, according to the investigation, the children tell Mulvey that the parents were fighting or arguing about the testimonies there to be read. The arguments between Michele, and here I'm actually reading from it. Discussion, what conclusions, if any, did you draw after speaking to them, the children, about what happened to the folders? That there has been some discussion over who gotten rid of the folders, the school folders. Discussion among who? Between Michele saying one thing and Calvin saying another. And I think they used Mommy and Daddy for describing who had gotten rid of the folders. So there's a discussion about who got rid of the folders between who? Cal and Michele. The folders were gone before the 11th. Cal told the police that when they asked him. He said he threw them away the weekend before. He thought they were from last year's folders. And the kids confirmed that for the police in their investigation. But we are still 15 years later, arguing about folders. Still, we have Thayer with her golf trophy and the folders and the cleaning and the scrubbing. Coming here saying, oh, they magically disappeared. It's ridiculous, and it goes to their investigation and how desperate they are. They knew on September 14th what happened to the folders. They knew from Ford 3 previous times they testified what that countertop looked like. And as far as what happened to the calendar where she kept her time, it's right here. People's Exhibit, I guess, 246. It's a copy of it. Here's the original one. And Barbara said, well, yeah, that has my time in it. That has different things on it. But we kept our time separately. But in September, it was a new time, and it's in a black spiral notebook. Look behind the page. Look behind the little thing there. And what do you see? What do you see there? It's a black spiral notebook. There's no mystery as to what happened here. And I don't even know why we're arguing about the folders, because there's no spatter anywhere near there. There's none on the countertop, there's none on the ceiling, there's no cast off, there's nothing. Now, getting near the end. The Harris family dinner, where, I don't know how else to describe it, but Mary Jo, and I think she basically admits this, ambushed Cal with these allegations of previous threats he had made to Michele over the course of time that didn't even make it into her application for exclusive occupancy of the house. His reaction to them was nothing more than the horror of being confronted by his sisters-in-law or sister-in-law rather than being given a place that Mary Jo, in retrospect, looks at and realizes that he was just looking for sanctuary. He wanted a place where he could be for the weekend while the police took over his house. The statements to Fran Harris, there were two that are relevant. One is his initial denial or his absolute denial that they couldn't have found Michele in the yard, in the shallow grave behind the cottage. He said that was impossible because he knew that they had been there searching for 2 days, the grid searches with the spring and everything else, and he knew that the area behind the cottage, which we have depicted here, is grass. It's regular grass. There's no shallow graves back there. The police couldn't have missed that. And if you look at the conversation, in the details of the conversation with Fran, you'll see he asked questions. What happened? What are they saying? Who are they saying it? And there was a bit of back and forth, and she says, why do you say it couldn't have happened? Because they already searched there? He says, yeah, they searched there, and he knows what's behind there. It could not have happened. The conversation about she thought she was going to get the kids, again, we have this past tense that sticks its way in there. Whose past tense is it? Was it specific? Did Cal say that? And what was the context of it? Was the context, as the prosecutor wants you to believe, she thought she was going to get the kids until I killed her, which is the implication of what happened? That's ridiculous. Or was the context something like she thought she was going to get the kids without taking any responsibility? Or we agreed to joint custody despite the fact that she initially thought she was going to get the kids. We don't know the context. We just have this statement hanging out there in isolation that they want to use to say that Cal somehow was referring to her in the past tense and she was gone. It's not plausible. It's not reasonable. I need the stuff about the 20th garage. Next, we have the garage sale, and this is the most striking of all Thayer's dramatic inconsistencies. She testifies that she comes home back to the house on the 20th, the first day after the police were there, and she finds Cal. This is her testimony. Finds Cal in the laundry room, dumping Michele's things out into bags, saying, I want to get rid of everything from Michele's. I want all out of the house. And this is what she wrote down in her own book, contemporaneous with the events. Question. Man, isn't it correct that in your book that you wrote on or about September 20th, that you wrote down, went to Michele's at 8 a.m. Kids didn't go to school Thursday or Friday. Cal played with them most of the a.m. I cleaned laundry room, bagged up Michele's clothes, and put in Chuck room. Did you write that in your book, ma'am? Yes, I did. Unbelievable what goes through with human minds. 15 years later, she takes what she wrote that she did and says that Cal did it. It is inconceivable that we can rely upon this woman to report facts accurately, and they're going to say he should be convicted of murder based upon her testimony about what calls she made or what cleaning she supposedly did. She took the things out of the house. She arranged the yard sale. She collected the money. She cheated Cal, as she puts it. This was her yard sale, her collection of things. She's the one who dumped the stuff in Michelle's laundry room on the 20th while Cal was playing with his children, trying to comfort them. And the proposition that she blames Cal for that, I don't think she even understands what she did. But it is truly unbelievable when you stop and think about that she engaged in conduct, wrote it down, and then comes into court and blames Mr. Harris. Inconceivable. She is a horrible reporter of facts. And perhaps the most offensive of all her untruths, is that Cal wanted Michele eliminated from the house, or words to that effect. Because we have over here photographs, photo albums, wedding pictures, and so forth. And of course, Defense 14, the letter that Michele wrote to her children about the birth of Tanner. Dear Taylor, Kayla, and Jenna, this was saved by Cal because Thayer couldn't get her hands on it, like she did the plate.
This is, excuse me, no reaction out there. Or you can leave court. Understood? Yes.
This is just inconceivable in some ways. What value would this have for a yard sale? What possible value? This has value to one person. Two, but one is gone. Cal Harris, and I guess his 4 children. She took this out of his house. Not to sell it in a yard sale. Who would buy this? Cal and Michele, August 25th, 1990. You know who bought it or who ended up with it? Mulvey. Because it was good for the case. Barbara Thayer, who was so worried about the children, when Cal needed her, and after Pam Brock quit, and asked Barb Thayer, could you come back and babysit again, didn't say yes or no, went to Investigator Mulvey and asked whether or not it would be good for the case. Cal preserved the memory of Michele for his children. He saved the jackets he wanted his kids to wear. He saved the wedding dresses that Kayla and Jenna could wear on their wedding day. He put together photo albums for them. He saved the wedding album. He saved the certificate. It is a lie that he tried to eliminate Michele from this house. He never stopped investigating. Never stopped with the surveillances, the searches, the ruse, the provocations. Never. And then in 2014 and 2015, we got more evidence of what actually took place to Michele Harris. We heard from 3 people from Texas. Now understand that the police had done an investigation of Stacey Stewart, but they did not do an investigation to find out what happened. They did an investigation, as Myers says, it was Hyman who wrote to the investigator in Texas to eliminate him as a suspect because the defense was going to use him to create reasonable doubt. And then gave him that executive summary, which was just filled with every kind of baseless rumor that one could imagine, and said, go ahead and interview Stewart and Thomason. They ignored dramatic inconsistencies between Stewart's account given to the investigator. It ignored dramatic inconsistencies between what Stewart told them. Think about what happened between just September 25th or 4th when they first interviewed Stewart, when Stewart said to them, I socialized with Michele. I know what the form says, I know what the argument will be from them, that this came from Craig May, and Stacey Stewart. But I specifically asked Paulie, did Stewart tell you that he socialized with Michele and her friend Nikki, and he said yes. And then 2 weeks later, when he's being interviewed by Investigator Myers says, did you socialize with Michele outside of Lefty's? He says no, never once. He tells investigator or senior investigator Schultz that he may have seen her once out and that he only spoke to her friend. They ignored the information they had about Stewart. They ignored the contradictions because it didn't fit with their theory. They didn't do what Pauly and Beers and then ultimately Smith, Salpeter, and Flanagan and Natalie Bayer did. They didn't investigate the information. And these three women from Texas came forward, and it's shocking in some ways what they did. They said, DeVries and Wade tell us two things that are still in evidence. That they each spoke to Thomason, and they each had a similar reaction. Now understand, Brinkman, Wade, DeVries, and Tubbs had never met each other. They didn't know each other existed. Wade says to the police that she has a conversation, to the court, has a conversation with Thomason about this incident. Following that, she called Stewart. The court asked, why would you have called Stewart then? And she said, because Thomason just accused him of murder. DeVries testifies that Thomason had given her an account of what took place between withdrawn to the content. DeVries testifies that she heard an account, without getting into the details of this incident, from Thomason. That Thomason is then interviewed by Salpeter, Jay Salpeter, and she sat through that interview. And her reaction was similar to Wade's. After she heard those things, what did she do? She left Thomason and called Salpeter. Brinkman had no reason at all. She didn't know the other two women existed, didn't know about Tubbs. No reason at all to fabricate anything. She's a parole officer in Texas, still works in a prison there. And she went out with a guy that she was working with one night, went to his house, and innocently enough said, what took place? What happened? Why is there a state police card? And Stewart's reaction to this is telling. Stewart's reaction to this is, initially, he has to go testify. He didn't know the woman. Why did he have? And then later on, she asked some more questions. Why do you have to go testify if you didn't know the woman? Well, I knew her. I met her once or twice, but I didn't know much about it. And then as alcohol began to loosen his tongue, and the truth came out, he says, I have to go up there because I was the last person to be seen with her when she was alive. And indeed, he was. And that acknowledgement, that statement, which he then follows by lifting up her search and checking her for a recorder or a wire, he knows what he has just said. He knows the admission he's just made, and he's worried that somehow she's going to tell what took place. That acknowledgement confirms what Tubbs told us, is that Tubbs saw him, he saw Tubbs, and he remembered that. And now he knows that Tubbs has come forward. And now we know that from 2,000 miles away, and 8 years later, in 2015, Stacy Stewart confirmed what it was that Kevin Tubbs told Cawley and Beers, is that in the early morning hours, he saw a person matching Stewart's description with a person he believed to be Michele, driving a vehicle or next to a vehicle that matched Stewart's vehicle. And Stewart tells the same thing to Brinkman all those years later, 2,000 miles apart. That's what happened. That's what I meant when I said the truth is beginning to leak out about what happened to Michele Harris. How could it be that these individuals all came forward to give information about one person, Stacy Stewart, who just happened to go to Lefty's 3 or 4 times a week, who just happened to tell the police that he socialized with her, went out with her, knew Nikki, that her sister-in-law Chantel knew her. How could it be? How could it be that Kevin Tubbs could describe that unless it was true and accurate? I don't have to prove this. The circumstantial evidence charge is clear. If there's any reasonable hypothesis consistent with innocence, you must acquit. It doesn't even have to be more probable than the prosecution's theory. Just reasonable. And that we indeed have on multiple counts. Stacy Stewart wasn't at work that morning. despite his schedule. We know that because Hunsinger tells us that he called the office in the days that followed Michele's disappearance on September 11th. We have Stewart's cell phone records. He didn't call from the plant regularly. Hunsinger said if they called from the plant, they called from the various phones around the plant. There were 6 phone calls from Stewart's cell phone to his job. 6 in all the months that we have the records for. And those 6 calls are September 12th, 13th, and 14th. He wasn't at work. He was calling into work that day, despite what his schedule is, despite what they paid him. And how Michele and him hooked up, how they connected that night. Did Michele call him from the payphone at Lefty's? Did she just drive over to his house and say hello to him? We don't know. Did she call his home phone that nobody ever investigated? Did she call Thomason first? We don't know. Did they just run into each other at a bar afterwards? We don't know. And we won't know unless Stacey Stewart comes forward and tells us. What is abundantly clear is that Cal Harris did not kill Michele Harris. And certainly there's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he did. There is an abundant doubt. And the lack of investigation of Stewart, and the mismanagement of the DNA testing, and the mismanagement of the collection of the blood, and the mismanagement of the photographing and documenting of the staining in the areas. On and on and on. In the multiple misrepresentations by Thayer and Turner and Luczynski. 15 years, Cal and his children have endured this. 15. I'm asking the court to find Mr. Harris not guilty because there's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed this offense. Thank you.
All right, pick up at 2 o'clock.
You don't mind if I move the table?
Yeah.